Okay, Pan-African Writing Catalog, 2017 version. This is something you can use for research papers, things along that line, where it'll tell you whenever they got languages in certain parts, and writing, ancient symbolism when that came along. You had ideograms, which aren't really writing, but they're kind of like pre-Egyptian type looking ideograms that are on the walls and things. It doesn't make necessarily coherent sentences. You would have to point at one and then say some things and point at another and carry a story on that way, but you can utilize those. And indeed, we do find those all across Northern Europe in cave systems, and even in North America. And some of the ones in the cave systems, I believe they have dated back to around 65,000 years, roughly, along with, pictures of bulls and things like that, through the last ice age, back whenever everyone was Ugg and caveman and stuff. But I digress. Let's look at this. This is a beautiful map, and it's gorgeous. And Africa has a very distinct shape of a country, and so does South America. And yet they fit together, It's you can tell where they cracked apart at one time and it peeled, and I think it's neat. One of the neater things about this map here is all of the different fabrics that show up the different countries. One thing to note here is that this is the way that it looks now with countries now, but if we went back 35 years, there would be a lot of difference in this map, especially in the top left-hand corner and around in the middle area, and then our lower middle area. And then if we went back another 100 years, things would change. And then you go back, and then it just borders start disintegrating away. And at one time, there was a tribal land that was filling up this whole area of people that were all variations on a theme and slightly different than each other. And the way we, looking at these fabrics here, whenever you see these each little dots and each little swirl that's in there, you can picture each one of those as being a little hublet of a tribe. And each one of them had slight little variations on a theme, just like, oh, I don't know, man, you go to New York and you've got Queens and Bronx and things like that. So you can imagine that these are all black people, but yet they have variations on a theme of just slight difference. A good example of something that I'm trying to iterate here is like Scottish people. They're all the same people, but they had slight difference in their little kilts and tartans. And if you learn the language from far, far north and went to far, far south and spoke it to each other, you could understand each other, but there's some different words going on here for things. And you'd find that just in a small area in Africa. And so there ends up being dialects and things that are broken over time, but we'll never know the beautiful languages that have been lost in Africa because due to old warring that they used to have back in primordial times, where one of these guys, let's say the purple one here, would end up taking over the red people, and you'd lose the red people's language. And then they'd take over the orange people, but then that strained them too bad, and they got killed back off, and then now they end up in the red people's area, and the yellow people come and take over the purple area, and the blue people come down into the red area a little bit, but then that stretches their resources, and then the swirly green blues from over here go, and it just keeps shifting and moving, and there's no borders, there's no lines, there's no fences. There's not even in primordial times, people would, make agreements with each other, from this mountain to this mountain, from when you walk out here and you stand in between these 2 points and stuff, and they didn't want you to get right up against that and stand there and go across a border. It wasn't the idea of things. It was a friendship thing. And we had these for a long, long time. In fact, we had them up in the Levant and areas and back in ancient Sumerian too. And then things started going wrong about in the time of Aries, and it became a time of war between everybody. Things just went crazy. But you find different languages through Africa as you look, and this catalog base will give you an idea of whenever different languages come about. And again, there are subtle dialect differences in each one of these areas, but what they're picking out in this is the current and latest and recent dialect that's going to be in that regional area, and then showing you the dates on whenever they had come up. And so, writing systems of Africa. And writing systems of Africa refer to the current and historical practice of writing systems on the African continent, both indigenous and those that were introduced from others. Today, in the Latin script, it's commonly encountered across Africa, especially sub-Saharan Africa. Arabic script is mainly used in North Africa and Guise and Ethiopic areas. So what they're saying here is that all the writings that you do find from down there are all brought about from Arabic people, and at an earlier time than the other writings that we're going to see. But ancient Egyptians, probably one of the most famous African writing systems there are, but it's Egyptian and hieroglyphs, and it's developed later into forms known as Hieratic, Demotic, and Coptic. Coptic language is still used today in liturgic language in Coptic Orthodox Church of Alexandria and Coptic Catholic Church of Alexandria. The Bohairic dialect of Coptic is usually in the Coptic Church. Other dialects include Sahidic. I'm not going to try to say all these names, people. Amimic, Lacolopitian, Yahumic, and Oxyrhynchite. I believe those were all correct. One of them might have a strange accent to it. But these are all the Arabic languages. But Egypt is not Africa. Africa is Africa, and Egypt is Egypt. And in fact, you can stand in Africa and talk about Egypt. You can stand in Egypt and talk about Africa. So they're different. They're bordering each other, just like Mexico and the United States or Canada or any country in the world that has a border next to any country in the world. So anyhow, there's Meroitic languages. The ancient Meroitic languages spoken in Meroe and Sudan during the Meroitic period. It's native to the Kingdom of Kush, which is modern-day Sudan, and it was used around 300 BC to 400 CE, and then it changed. So it dates back as far as about 300 BC. Old Nubian is an ancient variety of Nubian. It's used in the 8th to 15th century. Old Nubian is written in an ancient variant of Coptic alphabet. So it comes from the Egyptian, but it's only really around from about 8th century, so 800 AD to 1500 AD. Tifinagh is an alphabet that's usually used in varying degrees in trade and modernizing forms of writing of Berber languages. And you find ideograms and things, but it starts to turn into a language. Neo-Tifida, which is a new form of it in a Unicode starting version here, they say that there's 55 divine characters into it. That you'll have to look at this as a separate entity, but there are some African dialects where they have clicks and pops and things like that, and so there are dialectic things that they give to that. Same reason that Chinese has a lot of extra characters too, because they have ways of and coming out with noises that sound different. So anyhow, Guise, which is pretty important, the Giza script is Abudaga, and it's developed in the Horn of Africa in the 8th or 9th century BC, so it's very old. And for Gia as language, the script is used today in Ethiopia, Eritrea, Aramaic, and Tigrinya. And I don't think they're trying to say Tanganyika. No, Tigrinya. Okay. And several other languages. It's sometimes called Ethiopic and is known in Ethiopia as the Fidel or Abugida. The actual origin of the 21st century linguistic term Abugida, which applies to scripts of India. And they say that it has an Indian origin in it in the first place. That's where they've gotten it from Persians right across the Red Sea Valley, but much farther down than where Moses supposedly crossed it. Ge'ez or Orthoptic has been computerized now and assigned a Unicode, and so it gets basic symbols and everything and designs for it. Ge'ez, Aramaic, and Tigrinya, punctuation and numerals, and here's the way that it looks, by the way. And they say that it was based on original ideograms and then in trading with people with India. And it somehow formed all this. And I definitely noticed this half-cut ball. This is an old symbol for sure. The triangle symbol here. And there's also the split ball, but the split ball that's open on the end, which just looks like an M. Strange. There are all these double dots, and I'm sure that's a carry-on of language or an ending, or it could be one of those diphthongs that we're talking about in languages. And there's all these grouping patterns of dots too that would come apart. But this is actually Genesis in Giaz language. So anyhow, let's look on here. Nizibiti. It's known as Nisbiri, Nishkiti, Nishkibidi. It's a system of symbols that they have in Nigeria. And it's really just a symbolism type language, ideographic script. So it's symbols. And it's not a carry-on language, it's pictures. More primitive than Egyptian type of thing, where Egyptian, I don't know if you've ever seen anybody truly read it in front of you, but they're having to put the if, the, though, then in between words and carry it on, because it's really talking like, I don't know how, I don't want to offend anybody, they're talking like a ancient American Indian, where sun come up, moon go down, and you have to turn that into the sun came up and then the moon went down. Okay, so anyhow, they have that type of thing. It's in the Calabar region, which is pretty interesting too, by the way, but it comes from 400 to 1400 CE, so that's a common era dialect. East Africa has a Luo script, which was developed by Dualo in Kenya in 2009, and that's the script that they currently use. Before that, it was a broken dialect and not really a written language before then. Horns of Africa developed these writing systems here of Unicode that they tell you about in Oromos. Southern Africa and the Malawian languages, and I used to deal with Malawi people whenever I used to buy tropical fish, all the African cichlids from over there, and they're so cool. And the people from there, man, it's like they could hit their thumb with a hammer, and still within moments they're going to be talking happy to you for some reason. It's almost like the Jamaica people. In fact, I have just a sense of idea that somehow those are the same type of people, because they're always upbeat, hey, and the guy would talk about the mbuna fish and everything, and you could tell that he was deeply entrenched with it. But anyhow, so West Africa and Central Africa. In the last 2 centuries, a large variety of writing systems have been created in Africa, but they didn't have writings to there. But some are still in use today. Other ones have been changed, largely displaced by non-African writings such as Arabic scripts now and Latin scripts now, more modern scripts, just like we did ourselves. We don't use Latin anymore. We don't use Arabic anymore. It's kind of a precursor type thing, and they were using the precursor languages for a while. But to make everybody get on the same page, I think we've all decided to try to get the major cultures to have that language and then to spread it down so everybody ends up getting on the same page, because we don't know what the hell Latin is. And so to have somebody have a language that's built on it, it makes it to where, you've got to get Pope scholars or certain people to try to talk to them, and it's much easier if we're going to all talk to have everybody on the same page. I believe that's the current thinking. I think it's been around since about 18 something, really, but it's been a hard road, a very hard road. But anyhow, so adept writing systems, Phoenician and Punic, which is of course up and northeast through the Pinch and Klitsch that's right there, and up into the Levant area is where you find Phoenicians, and they ended up coming around the southern tip of Africa, and the whole crescent there that's theirs. Really, Phoenician is a large part of the area that they call Levant, and it's kind of a precursor to Greek and Arabic, it seems. Phoenicians from now Lebanon traded in North Africans and founded cities there. So they went all the way down through into North Africa, the most famous being Carthage. Phoenician alphabet is thought to be the origin of many others, including Arabic, Greek, and Latin. The Carthaginian dialect is called Punic. Today's Tinaf is thought to be from Punic. This is still under some debate, though. But it looked like, to a lot of people, it looks like it's a mix between that and a Muslim dialect, like an Islam type of thing. And here is ancient Phoenician. And by the way, ancient Hebrew comes from ancient Phoenician. And of course, it comes from these Phoenician people. Kronos was a Phoenician. It's Kronos and Saturn and those Greek gods, early Greek and Roman gods, actually. So Greek, the Greek alphabet was adapted in Egypt to the Coptic alphabet and language, which today is the liturgical language of the Coptic Church. Later, the alphabet was turned and adapted in what's known as Coptic alphabet, with addition of 7 letters derived from ancient Demotic. So, at first they were missing a few letters. Here you can see A, B, C, G, D, H, V. They're missing letters in there and stuff, and just certain sounds and phonetics. In fact, most of these languages, that we're looking at didn't have the full range of noises that a person can make to make sounds. And it's something that linguistics people have studied, and I've studied a little bit with my linguistics thing, and it's neat how in a certain area you get caught in certain languages and certain sounds and others. One of the most unique is Hawaii, where they're just missing about 8 letters, I believe, out of the. So everything is Wapanui, everything has a Nunomanningamu, everything has these letters. You have to make it out of those, whether it's 2 or 3 letters to make up each sound, and then of course doublets and triplets make together to make a concept. But anyhow, Arabic script was introduced into Africa by the spread of Islam and trade, and apart from its obvious use, the Arabic language has been adapted for a number of other languages over the centuries. The Arabic script is still in use in some of these cases, but not in others. In fact, Arabic is what came around and created the great empire of the Moors that Persia had with them and everything. So, anyhow, you can pause this and read this, but basically, the adopted scripts are Ur, Jami, Selhel, and these in the languages that are black now in the northern African area are twists of that exact same language. Now, Arabic script instead of, let's see, there are a few cases where Muslims in Ethiopia have used the Arabic script instead for reasons of religious identity, and that's how you get the twists in that area. So you get local dialect with this going on, with twists on who's going to be on whose side, and then you get language. It's just like the confusion of languages in the Bible, people. So, and Latin script. First systematic attempts to adapt Latin script to African languages were probably used by Christian missionaries on the eve of European colonization. These, however, were isolated, done by people without linguistic training, and sometimes resulted in competing systems for the same or similar languages. And that's what we were just talking about a minute ago. So it becomes a problem sometimes with them trying to get an exacting language for even the people and the tribes. And then, of course, they're moving around and fighting each other. We're trying to come up with borders, an idea of borders, but at that time there's no borders, there's no fence. There's some areas where we live all the way to those mountains. We live all the way to here to there. And indeed, it's that way. A lot of the Persian continents and all old societies seem to be separated by either a desert or a mountain or something like that. So anyhow, you can pause this and read on yourself for it. But um, it seems like most of the African dialects, though, that you have today are broken from each little tribal area that they have. Here's your reference word. And it seems like they're broken from each little tribal area, and then they've tried to adapt that to the way that they would towards writing language like we do today, and have turned it into a coherent thing that you can continue to write and keep. So they won't lose these languages anymore. And one day everybody's going to be speaking English or whatever, and so in the process, you don't want to lose your homeward language, though, possibly too. So you may want to learn it. In fact, African Americans, I don't know if any of them have taken to learning African dialect. I remember when my dad was in the service. I mean, this was in the early '70s. There was a man that was Nigerian that was in the service that was from there, and he had grown up with a Nigerian mom but didn't have much language, but had learned a lot of it, and then he was getting to where he could just speak it, and everything. So kind of like Mexican Americans coming here to Mexico, having Mexican parents or grandmas, and then they can't talk to their Mexican grandma, but then they learn enough of Spanish to where they can carry it on, and they learn Spanish so they can talk to their grandma. It happens a lot in our culture here. So anyhow, neat references here and stuff to it, but yeah. So it looks like Arabic and Punic and Phoenician and Greek, of course, is what comes around the side of the area and ends up giving you what we have today in each area. And so that comes in from the point right here where it connects, and then it's all these top countries that are right here, through Morocco and so on. and it doesn't show on here, but this is all a desert all through here, and it basically separated these people for thousands of years and let them be specialized and do what they do. But I just love the fabric of this map. I mean, it looks neat, in the first place, something like that. I could see that on the back of a jacket or something, and it just looks cool as hell. All right, y'all have a good day. Thanks.